Okay, and now we have Yael and David for the worst of cybersecurity reporting in 2023.
All right. All right, everybody, if you're here for the worst of cybersecurity reporting, you are in the right place. If you are not here for the worst of cybersecurity reporting, you're still in the right place. Welcome. So, as was mentioned earlier, I'm David Huerta, digital security trainer over Freedom of the Press Foundation, and this is...
Hi, everybody, I'm Yael.
And this year, we're going to do our annual talk. We're going to talk about the worst cybersecurity reporting that we ran into in the year 2023, the year of a lot of cobbled together stable diffusion and other LLM and various machine learning language things that have been, or machine learning things that have been co-opted as being called AI. I don't know. If I don't see Lisp code, it's not AI. I'm old school like that. Sorry. Hello, so Yael, you can talk a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi everybody, I'm Yael, and my day job is working for Security Planner. This is not a Security Planner talk, but I do have stickers. And my background is in journalism. I actually went to Cronkite for grad school, and it was pretty fun. See, there's a Cronkite alum here. It was actually really cool because it started right after DEF CON and ended right before the next DEF CON. So a really nice way to kill time between DEF CONs.
And I'm David Huerta. I'm a digital security trainer over at Freedom of the Press Foundation, where we basically help journalists not get hacked. Which is working out. Actually, it's surprisingly good these days, which is great. Also, sometimes do a little bit of cybersecurity reporting myself. And then way back in 2010, my friends and I helped co-found your local Arizona hackerspace, HeatSync Labs, which you should all go check out. It is down the street in downtown Mesa. It's still there, which is kind of amazing, given all the shenanigans that people do and all the various chemicals and flammable materials, like safety third. All right. So welcome back to our annual grill. Fun fact about this image, Bing would not let me take actually get it describe the CEO of OpenAI. So I said, I described the characteristics that looks like the CEO of OpenAI, and it let me through. So AI is not that I guess. All right.
So right now we're going to be roasting print articles, not because they're more roastable, but that's just because we had to narrow it down somehow. So we're not going to be roasting op-eds. It's just a little bit too easy. We're not going to do broadcasts because we didn't want to watch 5 million videos. And we are not doing marketing material, even though we probably should. But luckily, there is some journalism that reads like marketing material, which is fair game.
And this is something we repeat every single year, but it's basically a very good reminder to kind of showcase that, a bad article doesn't mean the author is bad every time. A bad author doesn't mean the publication is bad every time. A bad publication doesn't mean the industry is bad every time. We actually really like journalists. We do journalism ourselves. We even like some of the journalists that we are roasting today, and some of the publications are, in fact, from our own media diets. And yeah, so we just kind of like to focus on we can still do better. Everybody, just like all of us, working as cybersecurity professionals as well as journalists.
No, we really do. Every year we roast a journalist that I really like, and I feel really bad. So please don't harass these people. But yeah, we try to put this in themes, and one of them is about context counting. And this very first article that we are going to roast, smartphones, is the best smartphones in 2024. And when I said that a lot of journalism reads like marketing material, this is an example. The Black Phone Privy 2.0 is the guardian angel of smartphones, offering an unbreakable fortress for privacy and security from the moment you lay hands on it. But we're not only picking on Black Phone, they also did this with joining the purism revolution and experiencing the pinnacle of tech with Librem. And also they put a lot of faith in VPNs, which I personally do not do. They said just as the finest VPNs do, Black Phone vows to never log your data, because we know that VPNs never log your data. That's not actually true. But, And I had a lot of questions about this article. I wanted to know what a secure smartphone is. And what is vault-like security? Like, what are the specs for vault security? And what about elite security? Like, is this like a spectrum? What do these words actually mean? And I really wanted to know why this piece kind of bounces back and forth, which is what it did. It was like, this is secure because it auto-updates. This is secure because it has end-to-end encryption. This one's secure because you can configure the security controls. This one has kill switches. This has Face ID. And we didn't really know how the phones compare to one another. They just listed a bunch of phones. We also didn't know who made these claims and how they analyzed it, because sometimes marketing material is aspirational. And so it's really great when journalists try to investigate and interrogate those claims. But every time there's a bad article, there's a good article to go along with it. And we really like this New Yorker piece about encrypted phones. And as you can see from the next slide, many criminals have been convicted because of stings of encrypted phone apps. So yeah, everything with a grain of salt. We don't really trust these marketing claims 100%. So what went wrong? We think that maybe the tech reporter was told to cover phones for security without being given a lot of guidance or the proper tools to do so. We know that everybody's getting laid off. There's usually one journalist doing the job of like 4 people. Sometimes there are deadlines that don't even allow you to do a good job with your reporting. And sometimes there's like bad editors. So we don't really know exactly what happened here, so these are just hypotheses, but this piece was kind of like a mishmash of security features with a lot of marketing hype, but there wasn't a clear methodology or evidence for any of these claims, and so that is why it won the award of making it into this year's roster.
All right, this is actually not the worst article, but it is an article that kind of goes into a really, really interesting story if you're like a cryptography and math nerd, but if you're everybody else, maybe left out or sort of diminished certain key aspects. So to start off the bat, this article is technically accurate. Like, there's no like false claims. Everything actually is just actually impressively like fact checked for a subject matter that is actually difficult to even understand in terms of just like talking about like lattice math. Does anybody know what lattice math is? This crowd probably does, but outside of this crowd, maybe not as much. So in this case, this was about an attack that was done by some academic researchers trawling through a whole bunch of SSH, IPsec sort of like handshake. Basically talks about some of the caveats, mainly being that there's not really that many actual implementations of this affected basically at all. So we're looking at a data set over 7 years of 5.2 billion with a B SSH or IPsec records. And out of those, a good 189 like private keys were taken. So, you know, the ratio that you can do the math yourself, but it's not necessarily, it's, you know, one of those like, will I be struck by lightning while also being stung by killer bees type situation. And the other thing too is it's not OpenSSH that's affected, which is what maybe most of you use and are familiar with. It's like weird, interesting, specific implementations of SSH from versions of, you know, router operating systems on Zyxel and Cisco OSs, but it's one of those things where like that could still be important if that is connected to important critical infrastructure. It's like, oh, is Zyxel used for like every hydroelectric dam? I don't know. That'd be an interesting thing to explore. It's not explored. And you know, these kind of like we're breaking cryptographic things stories are, you know, very technically impressive. So they're a pretty big deal, but also as far as like being able to explain, like, you know, do you as an everyday user of the internet have things to worry about here if you just use SSH or IPsec for stuff? Perhaps not. All right.
Okay, so our next category is sensationalism, and our next story is about a hacking expert who has mainstream apps that he would never use because of privacy risks. They interview a security researcher. We all know them. Some of us are them in this room, I'm sure, who like don't use certain things for certain reasons. This person in particular doesn't use Uber, WhatsApp, photo editing software, weather apps, or a digital voice assistant. And there's a lot of different people who use and don't use different things. There are a lot of opinions in this space. Aside from voice assistants, he said don't put it in your bedroom or bathroom if you have one, which is good advice. But other than that, the piece doesn't really explain the risks or mitigations. Like, what if you really want to use it? What should you do? And I feel like what went wrong here is really on the part of the journalists, because they interview a single person who says he won't use things and then print it as advice for everybody, even if they have completely different context, situations, needs, threat models, and like appetite for risk. And so I thought that was kind of lazy, and it's really unclear why this happened. Like, is it deadline pressure, so they couldn't add context or interview other people? Was it a bad assignment? Maybe people didn't want to talk to this journalist, so they couldn't find another source, but it's just kind of, I feel like that's kind of the equivalent of being a fashion magazine and saying, this person won't wear certain outfits for reasons, and just publishing that. So it's a little lazy.
All right, here's an oldie and a goodie. No, this is not copied and pasted from last year or the year before that or the year before that. It's just a new article about juice jacking, which is still isn't a thing, Gretchen. Like, it's not going to be a thing. So this is the latest juice jacking story from NPR that happened last year that looked at a sort of repeated sort of warning about this proof of concept in this FCC document, which it references, but also the FCC document itself actually talks about how this has not really been seen like as a real ubiquitous thing. It's been more of like a proof of concept thing that people have developed for researchers to just kind of prove that it can be done. I mean, this is one of those kind of situations where there seems like there was some sort of like, you know, they wanted a second opinion from somebody that was an expert. Maybe that expert maybe did more speculation than explanation on like, well, this could be more of a thing due to pandemic, which was a weird kind of like take on like why juice jacking would suddenly become a thing. But I think the like kind of last bullet point is probably the most important lesson of this, is that I think that, you know, for us in this room, there's a lot of things that are very easy and make sense that are completely not easy and not economically sensible. If you're a cyber criminal and you have a massive return on investment from a very, very, very low cost, you know, phishing campaign, or if you have like a good return on investment into that, like why would you build custom bespoke electronics, go back and forth with whatever fab you're working with to make that a thing, sneak into airports somehow and use that to like unscrew like power outlets and put in bespoke hardware that has to fit in these tiny little spaces? Like, there's a reason why this doesn't exist in the world yet. All right, and yeah, so basically just to reiterate, like this has been just a proof of concept attack for a long time. But the fact that this has been only a proof of concept for half a decade, I think deserves some exploration. That wasn't happening in any of these articles over the past few years.
Okay, I really like the writer of this, and journalists don't usually write their own headlines, but the first thing I'm going to do is make fun of the headline because it's 3 lines long. Hacking tool, Flipper Zero, tracked by intelligence agencies, which fear white nationalists might deploy it against the power grid. Okay, I would really like to see some evidence for this or better framing for this. And the piece did disclose that there's actually limited capabilities. For example, gates aren't inherently susceptible to Flipper Zero attacks. Older gates are actually more susceptible to radio interception. So maybe that's the real story here, is that these intelligence agencies are like overstating the threats of these issues. To be fair, as far as what went wrong, there was a little bit of nuance in the story. It does hint at exaggeration. I don't know if the report itself is newsworthy. Definitely not the framing. And then also, like, I think like a lot of readers might not worry about people taking away their flipper zeros. I worry about people taking away my flipper zero.
That's right, Canada.
Yeah, Canada is taking away flipper zeros because people steal cars, which is not, like, I feel like the act should be illegal and the car manufacturers should get better instead of like taking away our fun toys. And also, I was like kind of disappointed. I feel like this is a joke, but I feel like this was a missed opportunity to get the feds to tell you how to use your flipper zero as a garage door opener, because I haven't been able to do that. So if you know how to do that, please find me afterwards. Let me know.
All right, this is, speaking of Canada, actually, where no flipper zeros are allowed. So we have this story from the CBC, which honestly almost didn't make the cut. There's a lot of like kind of like weird intrigue surrounding it. It's very much like a spy novel. So basically, there was somebody from the RCMP, which yes, is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Not all of them have like the horsies and the hats and the red outfits, but some of them do kind of more cybersecurity things. And in one case, there was a story where somebody was basically charged with selling basically Five Eyes shared intelligence with a sort of like criminal underground that was basically like funneling things into, among other places, Iran. So this is probably a super interesting story. Also, this is also just, all these headlines are just getting longer. There's headline inflation. I don't understand. All right, and unfortunately, you know, when it came to other stories like this, when it came down to like the Snowden revelations, we got the goods, we got evidence, we had the receipts, we had like, here's literally a PowerPoint presentation of what was being done. And in this case, we have no such receipts, I guess, unless we are, you know, criminals that want to sell them to Iran, I guess. But yeah, in this case, we have these sort of like weird claims that just kind of end up getting floated, like Tuta, which is like Tuta Nota, which is sort of like German proton mail, as being sort of a front, a honeypot basically, for some sort of Five Eyes thing that there was no detail out about. There's not really questions that are being asked, but then they probably wouldn't be answered anyway because there's a whole like big old court process that's a very big deal. So it's one of those things that like it does include like a rebuttal, but also it's like, well, also Google's PR team had no idea that PRISM was a thing, so you know, they were caught off guard and said they weren't doing it when they were. And this is sometimes like this is a very difficult story to handle because you just don't have anything to prove anything one way or the other for a lot of these things. And you're talking about, you know, people that are very, very interested in keeping secrets that are involved. So there's a lot that basically isn't presented as evidence. Maybe that could have been a little more highlighted perhaps. But otherwise, like this is really not necessarily the media's fault so much as it is just like the security state, I would say.
Okay, so this next story is again a Dr. Bonner style, label style headline about hackers abusing Gmail's blue check marks. Experts warn 1.8 billion Google users about imposters trying to steal money and passwords. And here's how to spot fake verified accounts. Seriously, this headline is like half the slide. But the thing that really made me upset about this article is that I feel like there's a tendency to blame users or give them like very complicated things. Oh, like surely you won't fall for spoofing if you look closely at all verified email addresses and see like, are there different numbers and letters next to the blue check mark? Because people do that to try to trick you. And I feel like this is like an unfair onus on the reader and like takes away from accountability that companies should be facing for having these errors in the first place. But we didn't see a really good article that we liked in Cyberscoop. So what went wrong? Actually, ironically, what went wrong is that trying to be first, it's kind of ironic because the Cyberscoop article was the second one that was good, and they have scoop in their name. But sometimes trying to be first and being hypey means your story is kind of meh. And like sometimes people think that you're empowering users if you blame them for not doing things that no reasonable person would do in the course of their day. It does not empower them. It shifts blame where it shouldn't be shifted. We want secure by design, secure by default, but that's my other rant for another day. But I did want to say that scouring through the technical details in Mastodon posts is really good, and that's why we liked AJ's article in Cyberscoop so much.
All right, this last one made me sigh because I actually really, really love the markup and recommend them highly for a lot of the other very important journalism that they do. But as soon as I read the headline, I knew this article would be bad. Like, so without a trace, how to take your phone off the grid, which is about, hey kids, want to do a burner phone? Check this out. So unfortunately, it's one of those stories, and I was like, oh dear. So in this case, there's a lot that, unfortunately, there are situations where like, oh, this journalist threat model actually does involve burner phone. All right, let me look into all the like several ways this can go wrong, so I can prepare them to tamper their expectations. In this case, there are like court cases where things like surveillance footage from stores where a SIM card was found was used to figure out like who was the owner of a particular phone number, even if it was a prepaid card. So that was like totally left out. And in this case, talks about using a used phone, but there's certain identifiers that are not necessarily SIM related that allow things like emergency calls, tower dumps, among other features. The IMEI identifier, I think, that basically are persistent across users. So you may have bought a used phone, but that IMEI, you know, if there are records of where that is and where that was, and like its past are still attached to whatever used phone you get. It's not exactly a clean start. And then there's the sort of like screen unlock code of being 6 digits long. This is unfortunately like very oftenly repeated, and it's not necessarily terrible for modern implementations of iOS. This is a slide for, but you know, I wouldn't recommend it. So because there's literally a screenshot of a 6-digit code being cracked by exactly the kind of tools that they're worried about. So this is a screenshot from a tool called GrayKey, similar to Celebrite if you're familiar with that particular vendor. And this is where, you know, basically cracked a screen unlock code that was 6 digits long, which is exactly what the article is recommending doing. Of course, there's been newer things done to iOS to prevent that from being too easily cracked, but among other things, there's also this sort of recommendation for Proton Mails being anonymous, which is often conflated with secure or private. And this is very, very nuanced. Like if you sign up for Proton Mail using a VPN or over Tor, it will ask for a phone number, at which point it's kind of not really as anonymous anymore. If you're doing that before you actually have a phone number, that would basically mean you have to use a number of phone numbers. So either you already have a burner phone that you can use to create the email account for the burner phone, or you use like your own cell account, which is not a burner account. So there's also other things that I think are overly cautious, I would say. Things like, for example, not using the Notes app on iOS because it's synced with iCloud. There are ways of using iCloud with advanced data protection to make it end-to-end encrypted on iCloud servers. This is a very, very new feature, though, so I don't blame people for not necessarily knowing it. And there's also just the other issue where like they're talking about overlapping Wi-Fi signals, not so much on cell signals. They could have maybe highlighted that a bit more to make sure people don't bring their regular phone with their burner phone. And these are all a lot of different skills in a lot of different places where you learn things. Like you learned about court cases from Pacer. Not very many people in tech have access to that because they're not lawyers. Telecom infrastructure is its own Cthulhian like hellscape, and I can't pretend to know everything about it, but I know that it's complicated. And in this case, yeah, they probably didn't actually need a burner account for what they were doing. They probably just needed to delete me.
So we don't want to be the people who just ran about how journalists are bad. We actually want to give you some advice for what you could do to be better as a journalist. And this isn't just for journalists, it's also for CactusCon speakers and maybe some of the people in this room. It is really important to put things in appropriate context. Otherwise, people, I don't know, it's just good. This is just good to do. You also want to practice skepticism when covering what a single expert says, what a single company says, what a police report says, or if there's a proof of concept that seems too easy to be true, like maybe put your skeptic hat on. I think the world could use a lot more skepticism. If you are a journalist, I want you to do this above the fold. If there is a lack of evidence for the story that you're writing, do not bury it in the bottom of your story. I want to see that high up in the article. Don't compare apples and oranges. That was specific to the phone article where people are like, here's a bunch of secure phones that all do a bunch of different things, but you're not like showing them against one another. And I think that just confuses people who are like, oh, I'm going to use X because it's secure. Secure for what? Like, what are you trying to do? And the last thing is, please do not blame users or tell them to jump through elaborate hoops to fix issues that companies should be fixing. Seriously.
All right, do's and don'ts for security researchers, it's important when we're kind of showing off like really cool proof of concept work, which I absolutely think we should show people that things are possible that they maybe don't think are possible. It's important to mention like the context of this, of just like, yeah, you know, actually I had to create bespoke electronics for this sort of thing to work. I had to do these things. Like there's a lot more to what goes into something that would actually make it not necessarily easy. And also thinking about like why certain proof of concepts we don't really necessarily see as much in the real world versus stuff that is like very common and persistent and doesn't seem to be going away, like phishing. And you know, it is a good idea and fun, I would say, to call out like terrible marketing hype. That is why Mastodon was invented, probably. And it's important in this case to, you know, keep, you know, no, I don't want to say stay in your lane in terms of like, you should not stay in your lane. You should explore everything you think you don't know so that you know more about that, and I think that's great. But it's also one of those things where, you know, being good at, say, doing IT stuff is not necessarily the same as being an expert on creating a burner phone. So that's my take anyway. All right, any questions?
Yeah, we're, and then also if you want to do the next slide. We have maybe a couple minutes for questions, but also if, you can find us both on Mastodon, and I live in Phoenix, so if anybody ever wants to get coffee and rant about the state of journalism or the industry, I'm totally down for that. And yeah, I think we have time for like a question or two.
I don't know where the microphones are at. Oh, there's one question over there.
I got one question. So with the type of content that's in the articles that you guys have described, how much of that, in your subjective opinion, might actually be contributed to like an editor-in-chief that might be pulling out content?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely an issue. Sometimes editors will rewrite stories badly. Sometimes they won't even show them to the journalist before they publish it. So yeah, you don't always know that there's an editor. Oh, yeah, editors can be really bad. There's good editors, there's bad editors, and writers don't usually throw their editors under the bus. So yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. We're at 0 time.
Yep. Sorry, we're at time. You can ask us questions once we're down here, though.